Hi, everybody, and happy Fossil Friday, and welcome to Fossil Friday Chats. I'm Brittany Stoneberg from the Western Science Center. With me, as always, is Gabe Santos from the Alf Museum.
TJ Fossil Friday, everybody.
And joining us today is paleontologist Dr. Eugenia Gold. How are you doing, Eugenia? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great, even in this snowy winter storm Boston weather we're having.
Oh, you have
that
snow?
Sounds amazing.
Freezing rain technically right now.
Close enough.
Us Californians, we're always like, oh, snow, it's so magical and beautiful. And meanwhile, people who have actual snow are like, I hate this. Please, where's spring?
This is horrible.
I'll happily trade with your California weather.
It is currently about 60, 70 degrees outside and sunny today in Southern California. We are truly, truly blessed.
Anyway, as we show off our amazing weather.
I know. If you are not familiar with Dr. Eugenia Gold, she was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and grew up in the U.S. She studies brain evolution and dinosaurs. That's awesome. Using high-resolution imaging technology. She's also passionate about scientific communication and accessibility, and I'm quite a fan of her children's book, She Found Fossils, which is a great read. If you haven't taken a look at it yet, I highly recommend you go and find yourself a copy.
Thank you. I'll say before we start, it's available in 3 languages now: English, Spanish, and Mandarin. So it's it's even more accessible now than it has been previously.
It's such a great book, honestly, because I when it was first releasing, me and Britt got right on it, and it's just because it's so well done. The art's great, and it's very accessible, and just a great way for you to read about paleontology to lots of little kids, boy or girl or whatever. My goddaughter, I got her the book, and because I buy her every single Women of Science book I can, because I'm trying to push her that way a little bit. Not that I'm biased or whatever. But she loves it. She reads it. I see her reading it all the time when we're at her house. So.
Aww.
Yay! Yay! It's helping.
Well, Eugenia is going to go into the amazing world of fieldwork with us today. So if you have any questions, go ahead, put those in the chat. We will get to as many as we can during our Q&A session. So Eugenia, whenever you are ready, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be talking about a few different field excursions that I've been on. They've all been in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm still crossing my fingers, waiting to see if I can make it to Patagonia, to Argentina to do some field work, but one day. So getting into it, why do we even go out into the field in the first place when museums have so many specimens already in their collections? Well, really, can you really have enough specimens? And the answer is no, because with additional fossil material, we're able to reconstruct ecosystems better. We're able to understand biology of different species better. We can get an idea of predator-prey interactions through understanding which species live together, and really have a better idea of the diversity in different fossil ecosystems. So even though we do have these vast collections in museums, it's always important to try to go out and see what new things or what additional things we can find. We find these fossiliferous areas, these areas with abundant fossil material, in a few different ways. We can use satellite images to get a feel for which rocks are exposed in different areas. We can use GIS to find those field sites. Then we actually have to go to those field sites, and really it's a lot of walking around, staring at the ground until you find something, because that's really when we find fossils, is when they're partially exposed on the surface. And to find that, you actually have to walk around on those rocks and look at the ground until you find something. All of the field excursions I've been on have these 4 themes. Car trouble is always, if nothing else is for certain on field excursions, car trouble is one of the things that will always happen. Food is vastly important when you're out in the field. Shenanigans happen all the time. It's good. And of course, the fossils that we find. So this first excursion that I want to tell you about, I've been on 3 total. So I've been to Arizona, Mongolia, and Utah. And I've gotten these opportunities in slightly different ways each time. So for this one in particular, for Arizona, my undergraduate advisor connected me to his graduate school advisor and sent me to the field with his former grad school advisor, while I was in undergrad. For Mongolia, I actually asked my PI, Mark Norell, if I could go to Mongolia, that I was interested in going, and he of course said yes, was very supportive. And then for Utah, it was one of those, I got approached by the people in charge of that excursion to say, do you want to join us in the field? And I of course said yes, because field excursions are amazing. So starting out with this trip to Arizona, we of course did not start in Arizona because that would be too straightforward. Instead, I flew to Austin, Texas to meet up with the University of Texas at Austin crew that included the PI Tim Rowe and his graduate students. And we drove this very straightforward 15 hours to the Painted Desert in Arizona. However, it wasn't straightforward because of course there was car trouble. One of the truck from, that was they purchased in 1980 broke down on the side of the road in Western Texas. And if you've ever been to Western Texas, there is literally nothing in Western Texas. And we had to wait there 2 hours for a tow truck to find us and tow us to the nearest city, which was like an hour away. It was a weekend, so there was no repair shops open. The tow truck driver drove us to one of his buddies' houses, and that his friend just fixed the truck in his front yard. We had a tire explode elsewhere on the trip. So we had multiple car issues on the way to the field. It actually took us 3 days in order to make it from Texas to Arizona on that trip. But then when we got there, we were rewarded with these beautiful geological exposures. Living in the Northeast, living in an urban center, it's easy to forget that the planet can look like this. And when you finally make it out there, especially as a paleontologist, it's amazing. It's really refreshing to see all of these sort of rock exposures and these formations that we spend so much time reading about as paleontologists. We set up camp, and camps look a little bit different in each field excursion that we went on. So here you can, on the left, there's a series of 3 tents and a car that was the girls' camp. The PVC Palace in the middle, and then on the far right with a different truck and 2 tents was the boys' camp. Don't really understand why we split it up that way. It was just who we wanted to hang out with more so, I guess. It was really windy, so even though we had our tents staked down, the wind made it a little hard to get in and out of the tent every day. The PVC Palace is something that Tim Rowe invented that is just an open structure on both ends made of PVC that we threw tarps over. We constructed that when we got there. And that's where we did all of our cooking and eating. It was a nice little shelter from the wind. And I know it looks chaotic around the outside, but I promise there was some organization to all the stuff. We had food coolers and water jugs and field equipment all in separate areas. And then we would drive out to these different exposures and walk around for, a few hours looking for stuff as we walked around. And sometimes we were rewarded and sometimes we weren't. And that's how fieldwork goes. In one case, I managed to walk around and see this little exposure. These rocks are Triassic in age, so there's not a ton of dinosaur material here. This is probably a crocodilian of some caliber, but it was part of the pelvis, and I got to dig it out, and it's part of the collection now at UT Austin. You can't see it, it's there. A lot of the time, the fossil material will have a different color than the rocks that are associated with it. And that's partially because the different minerals in the water that flows through the bone as it's turning into a fossil will solidify and be a different color depending on that mineral content. So in some cases, in these rocks, the fossils were actually shades of purple, which was really interesting. So I know that doesn't come out in this picture, but there is some purple tint to this fossil, which made it more evident against the grayness of the rocks. In some cases, there were quarries that they already knew about, and so we went to those quarries and dug out the bigger fossil material. And the way we do that, we never prep stuff out in the field. If we find a bone, we try to find the extent of that bone in the rock and put plaster, the same kind of plaster that hospitals use to make casts if you break a bone. That's what we bring out to the field, and we cover the fossil, the top of the fossil in that. And then we dig around the whole piece of rock containing that fossil and try to make it undercut it so that we end up with this pedestal. Wrap the whole thing in plaster and then roll it over so it's on the nicely shielded top side and plaster the bottom of it so we can take it out as a block and then it gets prepared in the field. So this is one of the days, I think we spent most of the day here trying to take out this chunk of fossil from the quarry. You always get to see these really interesting, unique rock formations that are just carved by wind, typically. So here, of course, with a rock hammer for scale, was this really interesting formation that we just came across in one of the hikes we were doing. And lastly, food. So food, I did mention that we ate most of our meals in the PVC palace, as we called it. But Tim had made sure, because this is petrified forest right near the national park, not in the national park, of course, he, in his time coming to the same place, had moved these 3 petrified trees, logs from petrified trees, into this little fire pit and made a windbreak out of fossil tree. So we could have a nice little bonfire every night. And the juxtaposition of modern logs burning next to these fossil logs was always really striking. Yeah. And that was the field crew. You can see me as a brave undergrad amongst lots of grad students. Especially with early 2000s fashion of the zip-off pants. That's classic paleo gear. The next place I got to go was the Gobi Desert. As I mentioned, the way I got this opportunity was to actually just ask my PI if I could go with them to this place. And he said yes. And so off we went to Mongolia, one of the places that is so famous in paleo history for finding really cool fossils. There's not a ton of reception, so I had a little device with me that would send out a signal to my family, satellite signal, telling them where I was each night to make sure that I was okay. And my sisters both came up, they made this map for me that showed all the different places that I had sent a signal from in Mongolia. So I have this cool map of the places that we were. And the trajectory that we went, so we went in a little bit of a loop and then headed back to Ulaanbaatar. For this particular excursion, we had 4 vehicles with us. So the cargo truck, the Unimog, that was our water truck, and 2 daily excursion Mercedes G-classes from, I think, the 1980s. And so we took turns rotating around the different cars and traveling with different people each day. We had a crew that was partially Mongolian and partially from the US. And it was super fun. Part of that trip, the first week we were in Mongolia, we went to these big cargo containers that Mark had established in outside the city that had all of our field gear, and we went through all of it and made sure we had containers with all of the material we would need for prepping out fossils, for wrapping them, for storing them, all the different containers we needed for cooking, for water, everything. And that took a full week of prep to get that all packed up. Again, it looks like chaos, but I promise there's some organization to it. We packed it all into that big cargo truck. There's lots of instant soup, fruit and vegetables. All the different containers were labeled with what was in there. Some light camping equipment in the back. And this truck that carried all of our water that we carried in these big jugs and then refilled periodically while we were out in the field. We would stop by little established towns and get water from them. More prep. That's Timur, who's the mechanic that had been with the American Museum Mongolia expeditions for 20 years. And that's me from a decade ago now, which seems hard to believe. Mongolia is just spectacularly beautiful. On the way out of Ulaanbaatar, the capital, you end up with these almost moss-covered rolling hills with mountains in the background, and every time you think surely nobody else lives nearby, you take like a 360, you spin around in a circle, and you'd always find one of these little gurs, which are the homes that Mongolians use out in Mongolia, sort of disconnected from the grid. You'd always find one, no matter how isolated you thought you were. There was always a gur nearby. One of the stops we made was the Flaming Cliffs, which is famous for the Roy Chapman Andrews expeditions, where Oviraptor was found and several other dinosaurs. It was spectacular to see that in person. Now it's a big touristy location, and so there isn't a ton of fossil material to be found at Flaming Cliffs. But you know, there's animals always. So we saw lots of little lizards on our whole trip in Mongolia. It rained, which I was not expecting, in the middle of the desert, and caused a lot of flooding. Luckily, we had big trucks and car trouble. So in this particular instance, I had been driving this car when Jonah, who's now driving this car in this picture, told me to cross this little river, and I didn't do it good, and we got stuck, and so he had to take over and unstick the car. And then there's also fossils. So in Mongolia, a lot of the fossils are preserved in a stark white color, which you'll see in a future picture. And they just come out of the ground, mostly broken into pieces like this. And when you find one after walking around, you stop and brush it off and try to collect it in a way that keeps most of the fossil together. Sometimes you just find isolated bits like this little claw. A lot of the time, the bones were just on the surface, in very white. It almost looks like modern bones that of something that died yesterday, but it's fossil, and that's just all due to differences in preservation in the mineral content in the water when the fossils were forming. Here's myself and Pei and Amy looking at different pieces, trying to put them back together as a fun puzzle in the middle of the day. Again, the views are spectacular. it's really easy to forget that the world can look like this, and that a lot of these rocks contain organisms from millions of years ago. There was one place that we went to that I was walking around and noticed little, almost thin plates sticking vertically out of the ground, that I stopped and looked at them and realized that they weren't bones. They were in this oval distribution, and it turns out this was a nest, and all of the little plates of white fossil material were eggshells. They were in an orientation that looked like they had been mostly in life setting. There was no fossil content on the inside, but it was a really cool nest to come across. This, even though I'm posing kind of silly in this picture, this is one of the cooler things that I got to find. We pulled over into this site that had cliffs in like maybe like 100 meters away from where we parked. And most of my colleagues went off to those cliffs to look for fossils. But what I had noticed in other places is that there's a lot of fossil poaching in Mongolia that happens. And in some of those cases, there were tire tracks that led to something and the ground looked a little bit disturbed, and then tire tracks that led away. And I noticed that in the distance from where we parked. And so everyone walked up to the cliffs and I walked over to the disturbed area. And it turns out that what was there was pieces of sauropod, long neck dinosaur legs. So what I'm standing on is the bottom of the femur of one of these long neck dinosaurs. All of these things that look like rocks are part of that leg bone. So this was really cool, and I got to run over to everybody else and bring them over to this site. Again, some of this geology is spectacular. These crossbeds are one of these traditional geologic structures that we're taught about as geologists, and it's really striking to see them in person out in the field. Of course, there's always interaction with people that live nearby, and so this family wanted to go to the same place that we were going to, and they just followed our little convoy until we got there. They were there for like a family picnic. We were there hunting for fossils, and they followed us around and were excited to see what we were doing and try to, communicate back and forth and two completely different languages about what we were looking at. Food. Okay, Mongolia was one of these trips that it was crazy how good we ate on this voyage. So we packed all of the food into the big truck, and every night we would pull out these foldable tables and chop up whatever vegetable matter we had, whatever meat we had. The first couple days outside of the city, we actually had fresh meat. And then after that, it was all canned meat. Still delicious in the field when you've been walking around in the heat all day. You can see from our attire that it did get a little bit chilly at night. And everyone would take turns cooking and being cook boss and telling other people what to make and how. We had these big woks that we would cook on that sat on top of these little stoves. We'd shove whatever wood we could find in the Gobi, which is pretty rare, in here and cook right on top of it. Sometimes we dug a hole in the dirt and made like a makeshift little grill out of it. So this was one of those nights. And one of my favorite things that we did food-wise in Mongolia is we had potatoes, and we would pull up to these little gurs, and Mark and Timur would go into the gur, talk to the homeowner, and come out with an armful of eggs, and I never saw a single chicken. And yet eggs. And we would take those eggs and make gnocchi out of them. And it was one of my favorite things that, like, in the middle of the desert with nothing around you, suddenly we have almost a gourmet level of Italian cuisine. Really, really hilarious. I think we made this like 3 times. In Mongolia, we didn't really set up tents. We slept on what we called camel felts, which were about an inch thick. And it looks uncomfortable, but after a couple days, it becomes the comfiest bed that has ever existed, basically. We'd build a big fire every night and just let it burn over the night. This is actually the moon in this picture, not the sun. This was pretty late in the evening. And again, like I can't even describe what this feels like in person to see sites like this. Car trouble. So this one we would always do a convoy, and this is the Unimog. I was sitting in this Unimog with Mark. We were the last car on the convoy, and we got this epic flat tire, and no one noticed. The three other cars just kept driving, and so we just waited. We just waited for like an hour for them to realize that we were not behind them anymore, and then they came and helped us. That's just waiting for them to come back. Waiting and looking, and then they finally came back. Um, and this is what had happened: a huge slash in the tire from driving over these rocks. Car trouble, always. This was on the way back to the city. And yeah, so that was Mongolia. That's the whole crew. And lastly, I've been to Utah. Um, we didn't actually have too much car trouble. The only thing that happened was one of our colleagues ran out of gas one day. So that was one of those rare instances of not actually having car trouble on a field excursion. Utah is really similar to the Gobi in terms of geologic exposure. It felt very similar. But in this case, we went to a quarry that was really established. This is with the Burpee Museum. And they've been going to the same quarry for years. And it's one of those places that you just sit down and you take an air scribe and you just dig in one spot until you hit bone. And you are very likely to hit bone because there's bone everywhere. This is what I got to dig out. And the same sort of process happens. We dig sort of a pedestal around it. We cover it in wet paper towels. We cover it in plaster. We plaster around the sides and then pull the whole thing out. This was a chevron that is now in the collection at the Burpee Museum. There's also bigger material there. You can see with the rock hammer there for scale. That they're collecting out, and it's just a pile of bones on top of bones on top of bones, and so it's actually a little bit harder to pull out in these instances than what we found in Mongolia that was just like soft sand and isolated. All of these bones are in really hard rock, and so you have to sit there with air scribes and try to chip away without hitting other bone. We got to see some other really cool environments. So in this case, all of these little black speckles on this image are actually scallops from an ancient like bed of shellfish, basically. And they're just everywhere. It was a really cool place to stop. There we go. So these little black things are all shells. And the exposures are just as remarkable as they were in Mongolia and in Arizona. There was one place that we stopped that we thought we were looking at sauropod footprints, which was really exciting to think, like, I am standing here in this spot that a sauropod also stood in, and now we are connected through millions of years of time. And it turns out we talked to a geologist at the site there who met us there, and they weren't footprints, they were wormholes, burrows made by worms. So, a little upsetting, but that's okay. We got to see some nearby cool rock formations at a state park in Utah. And, you know, wildlife also in Utah is a little bit more familiar to us here living in the US. But all of the excursions were equally filled with car trouble, lots of food, very silly nights filled with laughter, and finding the occasional fossil that made it all worthwhile. So that's what I have for you today.
That was a cool story. Oh, field work.
Thank you. Ah,
Yeah, right?
food, fossils, car shenanigans.
All right, speaking of
Always
food,
car shenanigans. Yeah.
Ohenia, favorite Mongolian dish you had? I have mine. What was yours?
Ooh. Um, I don't know that this counts. The thing that I showed the picture where we dug a hole and grilled over the ground, that was sheep. That was a sheep leg that the Mongolian crew had found somewhere. I think that one was my favorite. That was really tasty.
That sounds awesome. I
All right,
absolutely love
now I'm
horseshoe,
hungry.
like the fried meat empanada type thingy. I ate so many of those when I was in Mongolia that like I crave it now, and I keep trying to find somewhere that sells them. And I'm gonna try to make it myself one day, but I absolutely love those so much. The second time I went to Mongolia, the moment we got off the plane, I asked our friend who was there with us, like, please, I need horseshoe right now. So it was like, I think it was like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and we went to the Mongolian restaurant in Ulaanbaatar and got it right away.
Oh,
You
I
had
will
your
I will
priorities straight.
yeah, I will I thought of one other thing that I actually really enjoyed, and I think I might have been the only one on the American half of the crew. Um at one point, some of the local Mongolians who were friends with our mechanics showed up at our camp, and they brought this fermented mare's milk that I
Oh yeah.
don't remember the name of, and everyone was like kind of skeptical about it, and I had it. It was delicious, and I was like, "This is actually really good." I don't know why
Uh,
everyone's so weird
I
about
think
it.
it's pronounced Eirig, something like
Yeah,
that.
that sounds right. Yeah,
I liked it, but I could only drink so much of it because I have a little bit of a
yeah.
lactose intolerance. But it was good. I enjoyed it.
It was like a White Russian, but without like the Kahlua or whatever that goes in there. It was fine. I liked it. I didn't I didn't drink a lot of it, but
I'm hungry now. All right,
eating
we have got
well,
some.
eating well on paleo excursions. It doesn't matter what the food is,
Yeah.
as long as the quantity is big. That's what gets you
Yeah,
through.
that's very true.
One time when we were in the Caparowitz in Utah, that was like my first and really only time out in the field. Um, we were making, I think, some sort of like a package fettuccine alfredo or whatever, and then we also had a packet of dried mashed potatoes. And I don't remember which of us had the idea of adding that to it, and it made it this like thick, pasty thing. But I remember eating a lot of that day.
Carbs with carbs is the best combination that you can do carbs with.
Yeah. We when we go to our field site in San Bernardino National Forest, we always stop at a McDonald's before we go, because it's a McDonald's where if you go in the right season, there are Girl Scouts there. And we will like throw down money and be like, "Hi, we would like as many of these cookies as we can put in our packs for the rest of the day's excursion." And it is wonderful.
Worth it.
It just goes to show there's like a perception of being in the field of like, you're roughing it or whatever, but sometimes, it's not really that bad. There was one day I remember it hailed in Utah in the Caparowitz, and they collected the hail to use for ice to cool down all of our sodas and drinks later that evening. And it was
That's
after being
awesome.
in the field for like a couple weeks with no like ice cold
Having
drinks,
ice.
which I know is a totally American thing where we love our ice cold drinks. That was some of the best root beer I've ever had.
Alrighty, guys, we have some amazing questions. This first question is from Evan, and this is a great question because he's just asking, "What's your favorite field experience? You showed us a lot. Like, what was on top for you?"
Ooh. So that's hard. That is a hard question because they were all excellent in their own ways. So Mongolia is a place that I had been. It was on my bucket list, a place to go to look for fossils. That's famous, and like the fact that I got to go halfway across the world to look for fossils was incredible. I had an incredible time there. I have never laughed as hard as I did than in Utah. Like our evenings, I think at one point we went to a local ice cream shop, and like we're all adults, okay? so it shouldn't be that incredible of an experience. But it was us and like a group of teenagers at this one ice cream shop, and I literally almost had an asthma attack because I was laughing so hard, and it's just one of those like I don't remember having as much fun ever than I did in Utah. And like Texas was Arizona was the first fossil excursion I got to go on. And so the whole thing, all of the car trouble, everything it was great. It was like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm doing the paleo thing. Like this is what I waited my whole life for. And so the grad students were like, "Oh, you're probably so upset that it's taking us 3 days to get there." And I was like, "No, this is incredible. This is awesome. This is exactly what I was expecting." Like,
Great.
so
That is
I
the
love
thing
all
with
reasons.
that is the thing with the fieldwork shenanigans. Even when things go wrong, it's like, well, as long as everybody is safe, then you get a great
Yes.
story out of it at the end.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the safety thing. As long as you feel safe, it's fine.
It's a unique bonding experience, and it's just like it's something fun that when you're out there, and like you said, if it's your first time, especially for a lot of folks, it's like I'm doing the paleontology thing. I'm actually looking for fossils right now, and it's such a I can't even describe the feeling of my first time finding a fossil in the field, because it was so yeah, it was just really cool, and I will cherish that memory for a long time.
Same.
Yeah. What I like to say is like when you find a fossil, and I think I mentioned this briefly, when you find a fossil, your life here in the present day is suddenly connected to an organism that lived millions of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those like your timelines are crossing. And it seems like it can't happen. Like you just learn about these in books or in museums, but your timelines can cross when you're the first person to interact with this organism in millions of years. And even though it's like extinct or whatever, it's dead, it's a bone, it's so cool. It's like what drives us as paleontologists.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
a great point.
I know what has a good like equitable feeling. Remember the scene in the first Jurassic Park when Dr. Grant first sees the brachiosaur coming out of the water and the music's playing and his face
Yes.
just looks like that?
Right.
That is like the feeling. That
That's
captures
it.
that feeling of seeing that fossil for
That's
the first
legit.
time.
Yeah.
The music actually plays for a
Agreed.
lot of us in our head when we see a fossil.
True.
Alrighty, this next question is from LSJ Art asking, what do technician jobs look like for someone who recently graduated with an undergraduate degree and is looking to build more experience?
Ooh, I don't know that I'm the right person to ask that question to. So when I graduated from undergrad, like I didn't get into any of the graduate programs that I applied to. Um, and I took a job as like a geochem lab tech for a year on my campus just to like fill the space. Um, and so that's what I did, but that wasn't like paleo oriented really. It was more geochem. So and then I got into grad school the second time around, so that worked out clearly. Uh, yeah. I'm not the right person to ask that question.
I think maybe we can take that a little bit, Britt.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we say it all the time, but like look and volunteer at your local museum or, there's a ton of great summer internships that are always available if you're looking to build experience. There's the Mammoth site, Gray Mammoth site,
yeah.
right? Yeah, there's that
not
one.
Great Mammoth Site, just the Mammoth Site. But there's
Site,
internship.
okay.
There's definitely internship options. There's volunteering options. You can sometimes get a seasonal position. So those are always options. So keep your eyes open because there are ways that you can do if you want to do a short term stint before you go on to the next thing.
I mean, both Brittany and I started as volunteers, and
yeah, that's pretty common.
We're pretty good now.
Yeah, we're fine. Let's see. This next question is from Half Quarter. Half Quarter. How did showers and hygiene related matters work on excursions?
That is a
the
good
question everyone wants to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll start. I'll go backwards. So in Utah, we actually managed to stay at someone's house, and so we all got daily showers in Utah, which is a luxury. In Mongolia, we just didn't shower for 3 weeks. One of our one of our compatriots would burn his clothes after he wore them for a full week. Instead of trying to save them, he just burned them in the fire. So it got pretty stinky, is what I'm saying. He actually, that same person decided to stop putting on deodorant because at some level, like, it doesn't matter after 2 weeks, but it was a lot. It was a lot. So, in that case, 3 weeks of not showering. The first shower we got, it was like we each took like an hour, and that's not a normal time for me in the shower. I take like 10 minutes normally, but like an hour just to get the grime off. In Arizona, we were only out there for about 10 days. And I have a quote from one of our crewmates from that trip. She first managed to like wash her hands with soap and water instead of hand sanitizer at a gas station, a rest stop, and she came back to the car and said, "Guys, I washed my tan away," because it wasn't a tan; it was just layers of dirt and sunscreen and hand sanitizer and dirt and sunscreen and hand sanitizer. So you get grimy, but like everybody gets grimy, and so whatever. One of the Along with showers and bathroom usage in the field, one of the games that I like to play with bathroom usage is how good of a view can I get if I have to pee somewhere. So I try to find like the best view and go with that. In Mongolia, we did have a cool system where, for the girls at least, for obvious reasons, we would take one of the cars and pull the car away and then turn it sideways so that we could use the tires for coverage, because there's no trees in Mongolia. There's no trees. We had one campsite that had a single tree, and we were like, luxury, a tree. Oh my goodness. So, it varies, but it's fine.
I remember my first time going to the Kaparowitz. It was like my first time, like, quote, like primitive camping or whatever. I mean, it was still really nice. We had like, oh man, they're doing it right now. So like, we had.
We know when these gardeners come every.
Yeah, I know, every Friday.
Every
This was my first time in the like field, like for a long period of time, and they were telling our director Andy, Dr. Farkey was telling us we're gonna have a bucket to use as our bathroom, and I was so scared, honestly, to like have to use that for a while. But then it turned out being really kind of fancy because we had one of those toilet seat attachments that goes right on top of the bucket.
Nice.
And it even had the little thingy for the toilet paper on the side, I think. So it was like actually
that is fancy.
It was very peaceful because you're surrounded by all these beautiful trees. You were away from the campsite. Like, it's really peaceful. And I was like, I'm okay with this. as you wake up and go for your morning bathroom run. Yeah. So that was my first experience doing that one. And strangely enough, in Mongolia, we were pampered because we stayed at a gear site, and so I had a hot shower and a nice bathroom every day when we were in Mongolia. So I was pretty spoiled there.
All right, this is another question from Ellis. Do you ever clean fossils or do any lab work? If you do you prefer that or being in the field?
So the lab work experience, the like hardcore paleo prep experience that I got was as an undergrad at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. And I was making molds and casts of a dinosaur. I wasn't doing any like cleaning of fossils. And I love my experience there. It was really cool as an undergrad to be able to like walk into the Smithsonian, an institution that I adore, and was, the one that was my home museum, the one I would go to as a kid every year. But prep work is not my favorite. And I feel like I'm a bad paleontologist saying that, but it's not what I do. So my research is based on CT scanning fossils and doing computer work. So there's not a lot of prep involved. I think it'd be really satisfying now as an adult to like clean fossils because it feels like it's like instant gratification, and you don't get a lot of that in academia. So I feel like I would enjoy it a lot more now than I did as an undergrad.
Yeah. But I think that brings up a good point, is that Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point. There's definitely like different strokes for different folks. Like if you know, a lot of people love preparing fossils and are quite good at it, but if that's not your thing, that doesn't mean, you're not a paleontologist. Um, so I think it's a good point. It's like, we don't all enjoy all aspects of paleontology. I am sure there are paleontologists out there who don't enjoy field work as much as other people. So it's not just a one-way route to being a paleontologist. If you be a paleontologist, you have to enjoy every single aspect. I don't think that's true.
No.
I agree. Yeah.
Like, I like being in the field. I truly do. Do I prefer it? Maybe not. I like I like I like being at the museum. I like being able to shower. I like being able to fix my hair. I like
Showers are overrated.
I I can totally do field work. I can do it. I do have fun when I'm there. But when I get home, I'm like, this is where I belong.
It's like nostalgia. You get nostalgic for the thing that you're not currently doing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like when you're in the field, like I miss my showers, but when you're, inside all the time, it's like I miss the field.
That
So
is true. We don't have windows in the collections room, so like being outside a lot is a nice, beautiful change of pace. And the
Mhm.
sometimes, oh, the stars when you're out there, that's probably one of the best parts is being able to just look up and see like the Milky Way, or like when you're in Mongolia, like just the vastness of the sky.
hmm I agree.
Alrighty. Here, so that looked to be our final question, but I have a question, and it's a question we ask all of our Fossil Friday chat attendees. What's your favorite fossil?
Ooh,
I know, hard-hitting questions here
it
at FFC.
just I have to put a lot of thought into this. I was prepped for like, what's your favorite dinosaur? I have a standard answer prepped for that, but
Okay, what's it? Let's start with that. What's your favorite dinosaur?
I have three is the issue.
Oh,
I have
okay.
three favorites, and they go in this order: Archaeopteryx,
Okay.
because
Yeah,
the
obviously.
the Berlin specimen. Let me be really specific. The Berlin specimen of Archaeopteryx is beautiful, and it's the one I have tattooed on myself. So like clearly that's my favorite. All right.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Velociraptor is number two because Jurassic Park partially, but also because I like it. Theropods. Brainy
Yeah.
theropods make me happy. And then Rhinoceros is on
Ooh.
there because it's cute, and I only started learning that one in college, and I was like, what is this? What is this? It doesn't have a horn. It's what's happening with this fossil? So I like that one. And I'll add Dracorex hogwartsia because it has the best dinosaur name ever, even though it's not a valid dinosaur name anymore.
I
Oh.
agree. I thought it was such a cute name for like kids would love it. I know there are a lot of people who roll their eyes at it, but whatever. They don't have they're dead inside.
I mean, have they seen the fossil though? Like, if you imagine a dragon, this the little skull, it looks like a dragon. It's like
That's
Right?
exactly what you
awesome. Yeah.
imagine. Plus, I was at the meeting. Okay, story time. I was at the meeting
Okay.
where it got announced that Dracorex was not its own taxon. All right, it's just a
Oh.
baby Pachycephalosaurus. And that entire meeting, Bacher had been rolling around Bob Bacher had been rolling around this rolling cooler for like days at SVP, and we were all like, what's in the cooler? Why do you have a cooler? And Jack Horner made the announcement. He gave his talk. Tom Holtz was sitting in front of me, who was my other undergrad mentor, and I was devastated at the announcement that like I was heartbroken. I was like
Yeah.
really upset right behind Holtz. And he turned around and was like, I already knew it because I reviewed the paper. And I was like, why did you tell me? Like, first off, rude. Secondly, and he laughed. And then we walk out of the room, and it turns out that what Bacher had been carrying in the cooler was the skull of Dracorex.
Oh.
And he just like, yeah, like you can see the features here that are like not.
It's
We're
just
like,
there.
why was it in a cooler?
Yeah.
Like, so many questions. So not only like is it the coolest dinosaur name, all right, but I have this whole this whole like story,
You have
SVP conference
you have a
story
history with
behind
it.
it that is just it's a lot.
I I mean, I have another shifting gears a little bit. I have a question because like, you work on paleo neuroscience, right? Like you look at the brains of extinct animals. What does the field work do to help you study these dinosaur brains that are no longer there? I think some people might be
So
asking.
Yeah.
yeah, uh, very little specifically because the field work that I've done doesn't correspond to areas where there would be more specimens that would be helpful. Um, it's just one of those opportunities that like I've been wanting to be a paleontologist since I was 3, and it's like the field work is the thing that everyone starts out with. Like, yeah, I want to go to the field and find dinosaurs, and I that's still one of the things that I want to do is go in the field and find dinosaurs. I don't go to places. I have not had as many opportunities to go to the places where there might be like stem birds that could be three-dimensional that I could use for my analyses. Really, a lot of field work is on the shoulders of past paleontologists, or like the research that I'm doing is on the shoulders of past paleontologists. And what I'm doing when I go to the field and find more stuff is providing specimens for future paleontologists to use, because a lot of the time you bring specimens back and they don't get prepped out for years anyway, unless it's something that like is known to be new and spectacular. They just sit in their little plaster jails for years until they get prepped out. So you are helping future generations of paleontologists by going on the field, and it's not always a one-to-one correlation with your research.
Legit. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been in the field. None of that had to do with my research either. So, all right. So it looks like we're just about near the end of the episode. So let's end with the question we love to ask all of our paleontologists on the show. What is one piece of advice you'd love to give to future paleontologists, or somebody who's looking to get out in the field and explore the world like you got to do?
Perseverance is what I'll say. Um, I when I was little and I would tell people that I want to be a paleontologist, I got a lot of mixed reactions. A lot of paleontology is for boys, or you're no one's gonna like you because you're so into dinosaurs, and it's like, okay, oh well, you know, and you just have to like, the people who care, sh- like don't associate with those people because they're not the right people for you. The people
Yeah.
who or like, yeah, dinosaurs are cool, or like, yeah, you can be into whatever you want to be into, and that doesn't like affect me, like that. Surround yourself with good people, and if you're hitting this resistance that somewhere someone is telling you can't be a paleontologist because of XYZ reason, be it where you're from, socioeconomic status, your presented gender, whatever, do your own thing, get through it, find your support system, and do the thing that you want to do. That's what I say. Even when you hit snags, like I didn't get into grad school the first time. I had done everything that I could do as an undergrad in order to prep myself, and like there were things that just weren't. It wasn't the right time. My application package wasn't great. Whatever, you work on it. You work on it, and you keep persevering until you get the thing you want to do. That's my piece of advice.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Thank you.
Well, okay, it looks like we're about at the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Ohenia, for
Yes.
joining us on the show
Thank you,
today. Like,
Eugenia.
Thank you for
that
having
was
me.
a
This is love this.
yeah, like we were we
loved
were saying
having you.
before we started the show, we've been wanting to have you on the show for a while because like, the work that you do is amazing, but Brittany and I are both big fans of like your SciComm stuff. Like when Dr. Neurosaurus, your Dr. Neurosaurus blog,
Mhm.
it's that when I was first starting in paleontology, that was one of the things that I found and was like so inspired by because you were sharing these amazing stories and you were working so hard to present it in 2 languages, which is not something that you were seeing, even just a few years ago in our paleontology. And it was really inspiring to me as someone who wanted to be a science communicator and educator that you were working hard to make it accessible to everybody. So, you know, thank you for so much for doing that kind of stuff. And we were really
I
excited to
appreciate
have you on
that.
the show today.
I'm going to give a quick shout out to my dad who reads all my Spanish Dr.
Yeah.
Neurosaurus posts and edits them for me because he's my team member. He's my big fan. He's an economist and learning about paleo by reading my draft posts. So
That's awesome.
thank you, Dad, if you're watching.
That's awesome. Well, shout out to Ohania's dad then. So where can people find your work? Like, where can they purchase your book and all that kind of stuff before we sign off?
Oh, sure. So drneurosaurus.com is the blog. I try to post this semester. It's going to be every other week. I think I can make that sustainable. I've been having some issues working that in my schedule. The book available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. So she found fossils, ella encontró fósiles, and I cannot say it in Mandarin because I do not speak Mandarin. So it's in Mandarin. All on Amazon. If there's interest, I can get the title and post it somewhere in the comments on YouTube so that people can find it in Mandarin as well. Yes, Amazon, drneurosaurus.com. That's my big things.
Fantastic. And we really think you should purchase that book. It's a really good book.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Eugenia, again for joining us, and thank you so much to everybody at home for tuning in, asking great questions. As always, make sure you like and subscribe to more channel. I skipped a portion, didn't I? If you like this program and want to support programs like it at both the Alf Museum and the Western Science Center, you can find links on how to do that in the description below. And now, as always, if you want to support the show, make sure you like and subscribe for more stories from the world of paleontology. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you actually next week, because next week is our special episode for International Day of Women and Girls in STEM. We have a special panel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see y'all next week.
Bye, everybody.